The elevator doors opened on the 44th floor, and Eleanor Hartley found herself looking at her husband's face on a man she had never met. She knew that face the way you know a song you cannot stop hearing. The straight dark brows, the jaw that went hard before the rest of him did, the particular way the mouth held still, while the eyes did all the deciding. For 2 years she had carried that face folded small in the back of her mind, and now it stood in front of her in a charcoal suit, holding a tablet, frowning at the morning light off the river, as if it had personally inconvenienced him. Except the eyes were wrong. Julian's eyes had always been somewhere else, already leaving. This man's eyes were here, entirely, coldly, and they landed on her like she was a line item he had not approved. "You're late," he said. She was not late. She was 11 minutes early. But the chain at her throat, the thin gold one, that held a ring she never wore on her hand, had gone suddenly heavy, and Eleanor pressed her thumb against it, through the fabric of her blouse, before she could stop herself. "Miss Hartley," said the woman beside him, smooth as a closing door. "Mr. Vale runs ahead of every clock. You'll learn the trick of it, a beat. Or you won't, and we'll all find that out together." The man. Mr. Vale. Adrian Vale. The name was right there on the lobby directory in brushed steel. Vale Holdings 42nd through 46th floors. Did not look up from his tablet. Marjorie. The Donnelly numbers. On your desk, aligned to the grain of the wood, as the gods intend. Marjorie Okafor was perhaps 60, built like a person who had carried trays through other people's emergencies, and never once spilled, and she gave Eleanor a glance that took inventory and filed the result somewhere private. "Come, Miss Hartley, the new ones I keep close, until they prove they can survive him." Eleanor made her feet move. She had practiced this on the train, the calm, the competence, the careful blankness of a woman who needed this job more than she needed to understand the universe. She had told herself the city was full of dark-haired men with hard jaws. She had told herself she was tired, that grief did this, that loneliness drew faces in the steam off coffee. She had not told herself her husband had a twin, because she had not known. The doors closed behind her on the cold, bright office, and the question arrived all at once, and would not leave. If this was not Julian, then who was the man she had married, and why had he never once said the word brother? "Breathe through your mouth for the first week," Marjorie advised, leading her down a corridor of glass and grey light. "It helps with the altitude, and don't fix anything that isn't on fire. He notices when things are fixed. He doesn't always enjoy it." She stopped at a desk that faced his office door. "This is yours. The chair is good for your back, and bad for your soul, because you'll never want to leave it. And he keeps people who don't leave. Coffee at 6:40, not 6:45. He times it." She paused, and her voice dropped a register into something almost human. "Are you all right, child? You went the color of the carpet back there." "I'm fine." Eleanor pressed the ring flat against her sternum and felt the lie sit there warm. "He just reminded me of someone." Marjorie looked at her a moment too long. "Everyone reminds someone of someone, up here. It's the air." She set a folder down with a soft, exact slap. "Welcome to Vale Holdings, Miss Hartley. Try not to mean anything to him. It's safer for the both of you." Eleanor sat in the chair that was good for her back and bad for her soul, and through the glass she watched Adrian Vale align a pen to the edge of his blotter with one finger. And she thought, "I have made a terrible mistake, taking this job." And then smaller, truer, where she could not quite hear herself, or the only right one. She would not know which for a long time. She pressed the ring and got to work. The first thing she learned about Adrian Vale was that he was always alone, and that he had arranged his life so that no one would notice. The penthouse 2 floors above the office, she saw it only in passing, sent up with a forgotten folder her 3rd day, had the held breath of a place no one lived in. Everything was beautiful, and nothing was touched. A single glass on the counter, a coat on one hook of 12, on the long table, set for an army, a chessboard, mid-game with no second player in the chair across from it. He played both sides. She would learn when he could not sleep, which was often. The fridge held mineral water, 3 lemons going soft, and a foil-wrapped plate of something his mother's cook must have sent, that he had clearly never opened. The whole apartment smelled of cold glass and the particular nothing of money that does not have to try. The second thing she learned was that he expected to be disappointed, and built his days to confirm it. He declined his mother's call again. Marjorie murmured on the 4th day, not looking up from her screen. 3rd this week, mark the calendar. Mrs. Vale will arrive in person within the fortnight, and when she does, you will want to have eaten beforehand. She does not believe in feeding the staff. She believes feeding the staff encourages them. Noted, Eleanor said, and Marjorie's mouth twitched, because that was his word, and Eleanor had not even known she'd taken it. Adrian Vale moved through the office like a man balancing something on his head that no one else could see, he corrected. He aligned. He caught errors before they were errors. He fixed things. He fixed the Donnelly contract, and the Harrow merger, and the assistant who'd cried in the supply room over a sister's hospital bill. Fixed it. Quietly. An envelope, no note, and never spoke of it. She knew about the envelope only because she was the one who found the crying woman, and the woman blowing her nose had said, "He does this, you know, and pretends he doesn't. You mustn't thank him, or he'll stop." And Eleanor had filed that away with the chessboard and the coat on one hook, and begun, against every instinct she owned, to understand him. He fixed everything except the rooftop conservatory, which Eleanor discovered the 2nd week, looking for a quiet place to eat the lunch she'd brought from home, because she could not yet afford to buy it. The conservatory crowned the tower like an afterthought, a glass house full of failing things. The air up here was warm and wet and smelled of rot and old rain, the first honest smell she'd found in the entire building. Orchids gone to paper, a fig that had given up, its leaves crisped brown at the edges like burnt letters. And in the corner, half strangled by neglect, a Meyer lemon tree, its leaves curling yellow, 2 hard green fruits clinging to a branch like a promise nobody had kept. Eleanor set down her sandwich. She had grown up among glass houses. Her father's hands in cold soil the winter they lost everything. She pushed the memory down where it lived, and she crouched, and she touched the curled leaf, and she rubbed a little of the dry earth between her thumb and forefinger, out of an old habit she never managed to break. The soil was bone in the top inch and sour underneath. Somebody had drowned it, then panicked, then forgotten it entirely. Overwatered, then starved, she said to no one. Somebody loved you wrong, then stopped. That's worse than never, you know. You almost made it. She knew exactly how that felt. All right. All right then, we'll start over. She did not hear the glass door. She did not know he had a habit of coming up here when the board talked too long, to stand among the things he had failed to keep alive and feel, for a moment, accurate. That tree is finished, Adrian Vale said behind her. Eleanor did not turn around fast. She had learned that too. It isn't, she said. It's just stop trusting the schedule. That's not nothing. That's almost everything, actually. Then she heard herself, heard the impertinence of it, and stood, brushing soil from her knees. Sorry, I'll find somewhere else to eat. I shouldn't be up here. Why isn't it finished? He was looking at the tree, not at her. He had asked a real question. She would not understand for weeks how rare that was, that Adrian Vale almost never asked anything he had not already half answered to himself, because to ask was to admit you did not already know. And he was waiting, actually waiting for her to tell him. Because it's still holding the fruit, she said. A tree this far gone, if it were really done, it would drop them. Cut its losses. Save itself. This one's still trying to finish what it started, even though it's killing it. There's a word my father had for that. He'd say a plant like this was loyal. She looked at the 2 green knots of lemon. Stubborn, stupid maybe, but not finished, not yet. For a moment he said nothing. The river light came sideways through the dirty glass and laid itself across both their faces, and Eleanor felt the wrongness again, the face she knew worn by a stranger, and she pressed her thumb to the ring through her blouse and prayed he would not see her do it. "My grandmother kept this room," he said, unexpectedly. "She was the only one of us who could make a thing grow. When she was gone, no one knew what to do with it. So we did nothing, expensively, for a decade." He turned to go. At the door he stopped. "Fix it," Adrian said. "If it can be fixed. I'd like to know whether it can." He left, and Eleanor stood with her cold sandwich and her ruined garden and her hammering, traitorous heart, and understood that she had just been handed the one thing she had sworn never to take from a powerful man again: a reason to stay. She fixed it. That was the trouble, in the end. She could not help but fick it. She had come to Vale Holdings to be invisible and solvent, to send money home to Coldbrook, where her sister Posey was finishing art school on fumes and stubbornness, to keep her head down for 18 months, and save enough to do the one thing she had promised her father at the very last: buy back the Hartley glass house from the bank that had taken it, and put her family's name back on the gate. She had not come to be seen. Being seen, in Eleanor Hartley's experience, was how you got a ledger opened in your name. But she could not look at a thing in pain and leave it, so she came in early. She flushed the lemon tree's soil and cut the spent wood off the fig and moved the orchids 3 feet toward the south glass, where the winter light would reach them. And she told herself it was for the plants. And not because, on the mornings he could not sleep, Adrian Vale was already up there when she came. They did not talk at first the way other people talked. They talked sideways. He would say a number. The cost of the Peterson acquisition. The percentage the board wanted for the Pemberton land. And she would say a thing about light, about how a south wall would carry the orchids through winter. And somewhere in the overlap they understood each other, 2 people speaking the only language each had ever trusted, the language of fixing what was broken, so that you did not have to say you were lonely. "You restaked the fig," he observed one morning, a week in, without asking. "It was leaning into the glass. It would have scarred." She braced for the reprimand. "I overstepped." "I didn't say that." He considered the fig. "I said you didn't ask. Most people ask. They make me decide, so that if it goes wrong, it's mine." A pause. "You just did the thing that was correct. I find I don't know what to do with that. It's outside my procedure. Maybe your procedure has a gap in it." "My procedure does not have gaps, Miss Hartley. But there was almost something under it, the ghost of a thing that in another man might have been play. It has me, which amounts to the same outcome and is more reliable." She laughed before she could stop it, and he looked faintly alarmed, as though laughter were a system error he had not provisioned for. And Marjorie, arriving with the 6:40 coffee, took one look at the 2 of them among the orchids, and said only, and set the cup down hard enough to make her point, and left. That afternoon the first friction came, the way the worst things do, wearing a smile and a good suit. A board member named Gregory Mott swept past Eleanor's desk, on his way out of Adrian's office, and dropped his empty cup on it, without breaking stride. "Be a dear and tidy that," he said, not looking at her, the way you'd speak to furniture that had inconvenienced you. "And tell Vale the Pemberton paper needs my counter-signature before Friday. There's a good girl." Eleanor set the cup down very gently, which was the most violent thing she could safely do. "Her name," said Adrian Vale from his open door in a voice gone flat and exact, "is Miss Hartley. She runs my office. You signed in past her this morning, Gregory, which means she let you up, which means you may want to be kinder to the person who controls your access to me." He looked at the cup, then at Mott. "Take your cup with you." Mott took his cup. But he looked at Eleanor on the way out the way Vivian Vale would later look at her. Pricing her, filing her, and Eleanor understood that she had just been made visible in exactly the way she'd spent 4 years avoiding, and that there would be a cost, because there was always a cost. And the only question was, who would end up holding the bill? She did not know yet that the bill had been written 2 years ago in an account that bore the name Vale, and that her own name was already on it. The first time the past put its foot in the door was a Tuesday, and it came disguised as paperwork. Marjorie had set Eleanor to reconciling old disbursement records, a punishment dressed as training. A decade of Vale Holdings charitable transfers, line after line of money moving out into the world and never coming back, which was apparently how the very rich proved they had hearts. Eleanor worked through it numbly until a name stopped her hand on the mouse. Vale, personals advance, repaid, no, and under it, a date, and under the date, an amount that she knew, that she had carried in her body for 2 years, the way you carry a scar you can find in the dark. The exact sum that had appeared in her father's failing account. One impossible week. The week the bank had been 3 days from the auction, the week a man named Julian Vale had walked into the Coldbrook glass house in a coat worth more than the building, smiled his half-second late smile, and said, "Here's the thing, Nellie, I have a proposal that helps us both. Marry me," he'd said. A year, on paper. He needed a wife for reasons he made sound like a game. A trust that unlocked on his 30th birthday. A family condition, a clock running down. He was always so vague and so charming about the why. And she needed the glass house saved, and her father saved the indignity of the auction, and Julian had money the way weather has rain, carelessly, everywhere. "It is the cleanest thing you will ever do," he'd promised. "We sign, you take the help, in a year we unsign, and no one is the worse." She had done it. God help her, she had done it. For her father's hands and her father's name. The last winter he was strong enough to stand in his own glass house, and she had told herself it was a contract, and not a betrayal of every principle she owned. They had married at the Coldbrook courthouse, with 2 strangers as witnesses. He had kissed her cheek, not her mouth, and 2 days later he had flown to Singapore for what he called business, and never come back, never called, never filed the divorce that the contract had promised would be clean, and left her a wife-in-law and a widow, in fact, and a fool in her own. Accounting. She had told herself she owed no powerful man anything that had been the whole of her pride. It was, it turned out, the cheapest thing she owned, because it had been a lie the entire time and she had simply been too proud to audit it. Vale? Personal advance, repaid, no. Eleanor sat in the cold, bright office with the ledger open and understood slowly, the way Frost understands a window, that the money Julian had given her father had not been Julian's. Julian Vale had not had money the way weather has rain. Julian Vale had had a brother who paid for the weather, Mrs. Hartley. Adrian's voice, behind her, and she closed the file too fast, and he saw her close it too fast. And something in his face cooled by a degree she was learning to read. "Is there a problem with the disbursements?" "No," she said, and pressed the ring to her sternum, and lied to the only honest man she had ever worked for. "No problem. Just a long column." He looked at her a moment longer than the answer deserved. "You hold your breath," he said. "When something costs you. I've noticed. Marjorie noticed first. She notices everything and tells me a third of it. A pause she could have walked through. I tend to find out what things cost, Miss Hartley. It's the only real talent I have. People mistake it for suspicion. It's closer to a kind of hope, actually, that if I know the price of a thing, I'll know whether I can afford to keep it." He aligned a folder to the edge of her desk. "Most things, it turns out, I can't." He went into his office and aligned the door to its frame with a soft, exact click, and Eleanor sat very still and felt the wall she'd been standing behind turn quietly to glass. She had 2 secrets now instead of 1. The marriage and the money, and each was a brick she'd mortared into the wall with her own hands, and she was beginning to understand that the wall was not protecting her. It was just where she lived now, alone. As he did, two people 2 floors apart, building the same prison out of the same fear, and calling it being careful. Winter came up the river, and the conservatory became the only warm thing in the building after 6. It happened the way the best wrong things happen. Slowly, then without any single moment you could point to and say, "There, that was the line. I should have stopped at the line." Adrian started bringing the impossible problems up to the glass house because, he said, the orchids didn't have opinions, and Eleanor started staying because... She told Marjorie the heating bills at her apartment were criminal, and they were both lying, and Marjorie, who lied for a living on Adrian's behalf, and could therefore spot an amateur, said only, and went home, and left them the key. "If the building burns down," she said on her way to the elevator, "do tell me it was the wiring. I'm too old to be surprised by anything warmer than wiring." He learned to make tea badly, and she let him. He drowned it, every time, left the bag in until it went bitter as a verdict. And she drank it anyway, because he had made it, which was its own kind of madness she chose not to examine. She learned that he had taught himself chess from a book at 9, alone, because his mother had been retrieving his brother from some scrape on his birthday, and the cake had sat uncut on the counter for 2 days, until the housekeeper finally threw it out, and that he had never told anyone that, and that he told her without seeming to decide to, the way a held breath finally goes. "You were the one who fixed things," she said softly, repotting a seedling in the lamplight. "Even then, I was the one who could be relied upon to mind himself." He turned a pot, a precise quarter turn, so its best side faced the glass. "There's a difference. The one you love, you forgive. The one you rely upon, you delegate to. My mother understood the distinction perfectly. She has never once been cruel to me. She has simply never needed me to be anything but useful, and a child can survive almost anything except being useful instead of wanted. The two feel identical from the outside. They are nothing alike from inside." He said it without self-pity, which made it worse. "People who get close to me generally want something I can arrange. I've made my peace with it. I find it simpler to arrange the thing and dispense with the closeness. Saves a step." "That's a terrible way to live," Eleanor said. "It is extremely efficient. Those aren't the same thing." "No." He looked at her, and for 1 second the cold went out of the here eyes and something younger looked through. "Apparently they are not. You keep doing that, pointing at the gap between the thing I say and the thing that's true. It's deeply inconvenient. A beat dry as a struck match. You've ruined a perfectly good system, Miss Hartley. The orchids have feelings now. I find I can't fire them. I've tried. They simply look at me." It took her a moment. Then she laughed, actually laughed, surprised out of her, the first joke she had ever heard him make. And she watched him. Watch her laugh as if he were filing it, somewhere he could find it again in the dark. And she thought, oh no, and she thought it with her whole foolish heart, and on the chain beneath her blouse the ring lay against her skin like a coin she could not spend and could not throw away. They fell into a shape, those weeks the way water finds a channel. He brought the work up, and she brought the dirt down, and somewhere in the middle they made a third thing that was neither. A quiet hour that belonged to no system. He learned the names she gave the plants. She named them all. It embarrassed him. He pretended to disapprove and used the names within a week. The fig was Bartleby, because it would prefer not to. The orchids were the board, because they were beautiful and demanding and contributed nothing. The lemon tree had no name. The lemon tree was just the lemon tree, the way the most important thing in a room is often the one you don't dress up in, a joke. "You called the Hendricks account a write-off this morning," she said, one night, pressing soil firm around Bartleby's roots. "In the meeting, I watched you do it. You'd already decided before you sat down. It is a write-off. The numbers say it's losing money now. They don't say it's finished." She didn't look up. You do that. You read the schedule and call it the future. The lemon tree was a write-off, by the numbers. You told me so yourself, the first day. That tree is finished, you said. She patted the soil. I notice you don't bring me write-offs anymore. You bring me the ones you can't decide about. The ones still holding their fruit. He was quiet a long moment. Outside, the snow had started, the first thin scrim of it against the dark glass. My grandmother, he said finally, used to say I'd inherited my father's gift for knowing the price of everything, and his curse for it too. She meant it as a warning. I took it as a job description. I was 9. You take what you're handed at 9, and you build a man out of it, whether it fits or not. He turned a seed tray a precise quarter turn. She'd have liked you. She'd have made you tea badly, and let you fix everything, and never once said, thank you, because she understood that thank you is how the rich pay you off so they don't have to keep you. A pause. I'm trying to learn the difference. Keeping a person, paying them. I find I'm 31 and starting rather late. Most people start late, Eleanor said. Or never. Late's not nothing. On the chain at her throat, the ring lay cold against her sternum, and she thought of the man who'd handed her a glass house and a name, and never once meant to keep her. And she understood for the first time that she had married the brother who paid people off, and fallen for the brother who was trying, painfully, in a glass house in the snow, to learn to keep one instead. The symmetry of it sat in her like a swallowed stone. She pressed the ring and said nothing, and Marjorie, locking up below, called the elevator and rode it down alone and said to no one, in the particular tone of a woman watching a slow accident she has decided not to prevent, because the 2 people inside it might, just might, survive into something worth the wreckage. What Eleanor could not stop circling, in the cold hours after, was the trust. Julian had married her to unlock something. A clause, a condition, a clock. And she had never once been told the whole of it, and now she worked 30 feet from the only other person in the world who would know. And could not ask, because to ask was to explain why she wanted to know, and to explain that was to bring the whole wall down at the worst possible angle, on his head, in the dark. So she carried the question the way she carried the ring. Against her skin, where it could not be seen, where it grew heavier the longer she refused to set it down. The lemon tree put out a flower that week. One white star, ridiculous in December, perfumed out of all proportion to its size, and they both stood and looked at it, like it had said something neither of them dared. It shouldn't bloom now, he said. It doesn't care what it should do, she said. That's how you know it's going to make it. She did not let herself finish the thought. Behind the wall of glass, the city burned cold and gold, and Eleanor Hartley stood a careful arm's length from the only person who had ever asked her a real question, and understood that loving him was the most forbidden thing she had ever done. Forbidden by a ring, by a name, by a debt, by every wall she'd built, and that she had begun to do it anyway, the way the tree bloomed, not because she should, but because something in her had simply, finally, decided to live. His mother arrived on a Thursday with the press 2 steps behind her, and the office learned what Eleanor already knew, that the worst danger to the Vale name had never been a stranger. It had always been a Vale. Brace, Marjorie murmured at the elevator, smoothing her own collar with the resignation of a woman watching a storm she had forecast and could not prevent. And whatever she says to you, agree with the second half of it and ignore the first. That's where the poison is, in the first half. The second half is usually just weather. A pause. She wasn't always like this. Grief does odd things to people who've never been told no. But that's a story for a day I'm braver. Vivienne Vale came through the 44th floor like weather with an agenda, furred and exact, and she looked at Eleanor for precisely as long as it took to price her and discard her. The new girl, she said to Adrian, not to Eleanor. She arranges your flowers now? How rustic. I had no idea we were doing wholesome. She runs my office, Mother, Adrian said, better than anyone has. I'm sure she runs it beautifully, a smile like a paper cut. They always run it beautifully, darling, right up until they run off with the silver and a story for the magazines. Do try to remember that everyone who is kind to you is doing arithmetic. It is the one lesson your father left you that was worth the inheritance. It was so exactly his own lie, said aloud in his mother's mouth, that Eleanor saw him flinch, saw the old wound take the old shape, and saw him decide, the way he decided everything, to feel nothing about it on schedule. And Eleanor, who had no right to it, no standing, no name she could give, felt a fury rise in her on his behalf that frightened her with its size. Because you do not get that angry for a stranger, and he was supposed to be a stranger, and he was, except he was the only person in the world she could not be in a room with and stay sensible. But Vivienne had not come for the flowers. She had come because there was a journalist, a careful, patient woman named Renata Sol, who wrote long features about old money and its sins, sniffing around the Vale family, and Vivienne wanted the family closed like a fist before the woman found the loose thread. There is always a loose thread, Vivienne said, drawing on her gloves finger by finger. With this family, the thread is usually named Julian. Where is your brother, Adrian? He's stopped answering me, which means he wants money or he's done something, and historically it is both. She paused at the elevator. If anyone comes asking about us, anyone, you send them to me. We do not have secrets in this family. We have a position. There is a difference, and the difference is that a position can be defended. The doors took her, and the whole floor exhaled. That night, Eleanor did not go up to the conservatory. She sat on the train to Coldbrook with her phone in her hand, and an old voicemail opened that she had never been able to delete, 2 years old. The only thing Julian Vale had left her besides a name and a debt. Here's the thing, Nellie, his voice, warm and already gone. Don't wait up, all right? You're better at this than I'll ever be. The staying. I was never any good at the staying. Take care of the old man. Take care of you. She had thought it was a goodbye. She understood now it had been a confession. He had not abandoned her out of cruelty. He had abandoned her because abandoning was the only thing he trusted himself to be reliably good at. It did not make it hurt less. But it made it true, and Eleanor had always preferred a true thing to a kind one, which was perhaps, she was beginning to suspect, the whole trouble with her. Posey met her at the Coldbrook station with cold hands and an art school scarf and one look at her sister's face. Oh no, Posey said. You've gone and felt something. After all that work not to. After the whole speech you gave me about ledgers. I'm framing this. I'm telling everyone. I've gone and got myself into something I can't get out of. Is he kind? Yes. Is he rich? Catastrophically. Is it the husband? Posey asked gently, because Posey was the only one who knew about Julian, the only one Eleanor had ever told. Is he back? No. Eleanor pressed her cold hand against the ring through her coat. It's worse, Pose. It's so much worse than that. And I can't even say how, because the saying of it is the whole problem. Posey linked their arms and steered her toward the dark glasshouse on the hill, the one with the bank's notice still on the gate, the one their father had built and lost. Then for once in your stubborn life, she said, stop reading the price tag and look at the thing. Gregory Mott did not raise his voice when he came for her, and that was how Eleanor knew to be afraid of him. He arrived at her desk on a Thursday with 2 coffees, which was the first wrong thing. Gregory Mott did not bring coffee. Gregory Mott left cups for other people to clear, and he set one down in front of her, correct to the degree, and pulled the visitor's chair around to her side of the desk so that they faced the same direction. The way you sit beside a person, not across from them. The way you sit when you have decided you are on the same team and have not yet told them they joined it. You've been in the disbursements, he said pleasantly, watching the river instead of her. 8 years of them. 9. Marjorie set you to it as a punishment, and you've made it a hobby. I do admire that. Most of the girls up here can't read a column past the 3rd figure. You read them like a woman looking for something. He turned his coffee cup a precise quarter turn, an unconscious theft of the gesture from the man 2 doors down, and Eleanor's skin went cold at the sight of it. Tell me, Miss Hartley, what is it you're looking for? Errors, Eleanor said. Marjorie wants the old ledgers clean before the audit. He let the borrowed sound sit, and it was Marjorie's sound worn in his mouth, and it was obscene there, a stolen tenderness held the way you'd hold a thing with an edge. The trouble with errors, Mott said, is that they're only errors until somebody decides they're a pattern. A figure in the wrong column is a mistake. The same figure, year on year, in the same wrong column, that's a decision. And decisions have owners. He smiled at the glass. You understand ownership, I think. You're the sort who keeps very careful track of what she owes and to whom. It's written all over you. The straight back, the borrowed words you've started using. That little habit you have of pressing your hand to your chest when a thing costs you. I notice things too, you see. It's the only talent that survives in a room like this one. I don't know what you mean, she said, and did not press her hand to her chest by an act of will that cost her more than the lie. You know precisely what I mean, which is what makes you dangerous, and you've decided to pretend you don't, which is what makes you reasonable, and a clever woman learns early which of those two she'd rather be, because she does not get to be both for very long. He stood and buttoned his jacket, unhurried. Friday the board votes on the Pemberton land. A great deal of money moving very fast, and fast money is forgiving. It never looks behind itself. No one has the time. Everyone's watching the front of the parade. After Friday, the old disbursements stop mattering. They become history, and history is the one ledger nobody audits, because the people inside it are gone, or grateful, or both. He paused at the corner of her desk and lowered his voice into something that wore the shape of kindness. A young woman alone in this city, sending money home to Coldbrook, is it, to a sister finishing school on credit, to a glass house the bank still holds the paper on. That young woman cannot afford to be interesting, Miss Hartley. Interesting is expensive, so be a clean column. Close the old files. Let Friday happen, and on Monday, I'll see to it Marjorie moves you somewhere with a window and a number on, your contract you'll like, and none of us will ever have been interesting at all. He left the coffee untouched on her desk and walked away unhurried, a man who had made an offer he had no concept of being refused. And Eleanor sat very still and understood 3 things in quick, cold succession: that Gregory Mott had something of his own buried inside the Pemberton deal, or he would not have come at all, that he had researched her down to the bank that held her father's gate. Which meant he could research further, which meant the marriage and the money were 2 stones not nearly as buried as she had told herself, and that he had just made the one mistake men like him always made with women like her. He had assumed that, because she had a price, she could be bought at it. Her father had been bought at his price once. A powerful man had named a figure, and her father had taken it and signed because the figure was real, and the glass house was real, and the Windsor was cold and long, and Eleanor had watched what the having of it did to the man who paid, had watched him spend the rest of his life faintly bent, as if he carried the favor in his actual spine, and she had sworn on that bent back that no one would ever buy her, not because she stood above a price, because she had seen the receipt, had read in her father's own careful hand exactly what the price had cost, and the number at the bottom had never once been money. She did not close the old files. She opened the disbursement ledger again, that night, alone, after the floor went dark, and she read past the 3rd figure and the 4th and the 10th, and somewhere down in the patient grey columns, the seam in Gregory Mott opened under her hands like ground after rain. And Eleanor Hartley, who had come to this tower to be invisible, sat in the cold blue light of a single screen and made the quietest, most dangerous decision of her careful life. To be interesting, on purpose, on Friday, in a room full of his friends, she would have, maybe. She was so close to it. But the way out of a thing you cannot get out of is never the door you're watching. And the morning everything turned, Eleanor was not thinking about Julian at all. She was thinking about Gregory Mott. Mott had been on the Vale board for 20 years, and Eleanor, buried in the disbursement records he'd assumed no one would ever read, the same records that had opened the wound about Julian's money, had found the seam in him. Small transfers, year on year, to a consultancy that did no consulting, a consultancy whose registered owner shared Gregory Mott's mother's maiden name. He was bleeding the Vale Foundation by 100 careful cuts and dressing each one as charity. And he was about to do it again, larger, under cover of the Pemberton land deal that the board would vote on Friday. The deal Adrian had staked his year on, the deal Mott had quietly engineered to collapse. So he could buy the wreckage through the back door for a fraction of its worth, Eleanor knew, because she could read a ledger the way other people read a face. Her father had taught her, in the good years, and then the terrible ones, when reading the books had been the only way to know how many days were left. And she sat with the proof on her screen at 2 in the morning and understood the position it put her in, that to save Adrian she would have to be seen. Fully, as the woman who read the records no one was supposed to read, the woman with a talent for finding what powerful men had hidden, which was, she knew, precisely the woman Vivienne Vale had warned him about, and precisely the woman Adrian, somewhere under the conservatory and the chess and the bad tea, was still braced to discover she'd been all along. She did it anyway. That was the moment she chose him, though she would not let herself name it as that. She told herself it was about Mott, about justice, about a thief. But it was the first time in 4 years Eleanor Hartley risked her own safety to save a powerful man something, and a thing in her knew it, and went quiet and watched. She walked into the Friday board meeting with a folder squared to the grain of the table, and she laid Gregory Mott open in front of 14 people in suits, quietly, without triumph, the way you'd remove a splinter. She did not raise her voice as she had learned, watching the men who ruined her father, that the loudest person in a room of money is always the one with the weakest hand. She let the numbers be loud for her. Mott went grey, then loud, then quiet, then gone, escorted out by 2 people from a legal department that materialized the way legal departments do, at the exact moment they become useful, and not 1 second before. The Pemberton deal held. Adrian Vale sat at the head of the table and watched the woman who tended his lemon tree dismantle a thief with a column of numbers, and Eleanor could not read his face at all, which frightened her more than Mott ever had. He found her afterward in the empty conservatory, in the early dark, the river lights coming on one by one across the water below. "You knew for days," he said. "Not a question. You could have brought it to me privately. I'd have handled it. Quietly. An envelope, no note. The way I handle everything. You chose the room, the witnesses, the 14 people who can now never pretend they didn't see. I chose the proof you couldn't argue with," she said, "and the witnesses Mott couldn't bury. A man like that survives a private conversation. He apologizes, he repays a little, he waits, he comes back. I know how the powerful protect each other. I learned it, watching them take everything from a better man than Mott will ever be, while everyone in the room agreed it was a shame and signed the papers anyway." Her chin came up. "I didn't do it for thanks. Don't give me an envelope. I'd give it back." "No," Adrian said slowly. "You did it for him, the better man." Something was working behind his eyes, some arithmetic of his own. Who was he, Eleanor? And there it was. Her first name, the only time he had ever used it, in the warm wreck of the glass house, with the lemon tree between them, holding its impossible green fruit. And Eleanor stood at the exact edge of telling him everything, the marriage, the money, the face, the wall, all of it. And the words rose in her like sap in a cut branch, and she opened her mouth to set the whole weight of it down at last. And then she looked at his face, open for once, here, hoping, the cold gone out of it, because she had just spent her own safety to defend him in a room full of his enemies. And she could not do it. Not because she was a coward, though she was, a little still. Because she could not bear to be the one who put the cold back. Not tonight. Tonight, he had watched someone protect him for nothing, expecting nothing, and the wonder of it was still on him like the river light, and Eleanor closed her mouth around the truth and let him keep the wonder one more day. It was the kindest thing she did, and the most expensive mistake she would ever make, and she would never afterward be able to say with certainty which it had been more. "He was my father," she said instead, which was true, and only a piece of the truth, and the piece that cost her least. "He trusted a powerful man once. I learned what it looks like after. That's all." She turned the gold knot of lemon gently between two fingers so she would not have to hold his eyes. "It's nearly ripe. 3 weeks, maybe." It decided to make it after all. Adrian looked at her a moment longer than the answer deserved. He always did. She would never break him of it. That habit of weighing the silence after a sentence to see what had been left out of it. And then, for once, he let it go. "Good," he said softly. "I'd like to be here when it does." The lemon ripened on a Sunday, and that was the morning Eleanor would keep afterward, in the place where she had once kept his brother's face, folded small, taken out in the dark, the one she'd reach for when she needed proof that the good thing had been real before the world came for it. It had snowed in the night, the first true snow, and the city below the glass house lay hushed and white and forgiving, all its hard edges gentled, and the conservatory held the warm green smell of growing things against the cold, like a held breath. Adrian was already there when she came up at dawn. Of course he was. He had stopped pretending he came for the orchids, and he had brought, with the awkward formality of a man who had never in his life done a casual thing, 2 cups of coffee made correctly, 6:40 not 6:45, and a small brown paper bag. "I didn't make the tea," he said. "You've suffered enough. Marjorie taught me coffee. Under protest, she said, and I quote, that a man my age drowning a tea bag was a tragedy she could no longer watch in good conscience. You went to Marjorie for lessons. I went to Marjorie for lessons," he agreed gravely. "Which you will take to your grave, because she made me promise, and because if it gets out that I can be taught a thing, the board will want to teach me others, and most of them have terrible ideas." He handed her the paper bag. Inside was a single lemon, a grocer's lemon, ordinary, waxed and bright. "For comparison," he said. "I bought it so we could check our work. I wanted to know if ours would be better. I have never wanted to know whether anything was better. I have always assumed mine was on principle. You've ruined that too." And there, on the branch, the gold one hung ripe and ready, heavier than its store-bought cousin and rougher and realer, the first thing that had grown in this room since his grandmother, the thing they had brought back together out of the wreck of neglect. And Eleanor reached up and turned it once, and it came away into her hand, warm from the glass, fragrant out of all reason, and the snow fell soft and soundless on the panes above them, and the whole frozen city held its breath. "We should plant the seeds," she said, before she could stop herself, future tense, the most dangerous tense there is. "From this one, start a second tree. They come true from seed sometimes, Myers. You don't always know what you'll get. By the time it fruits, will." She stopped. She heard the wheel. She heard the years folded inside it, the assumption, the wall come down so quietly, she hadn't felt it fall. "Wheel," Adrian repeated, and he did not flinch from it. The man who flinched from everything, who had built a life, so that no sentence could ever arrive at a future with another person inside it. He took the lemon from her hand and turned it in the light and said, in the careful voice of someone trying a word in a language he had been told all his life he could not speak. Yes. By the time it fruits, Wheel, he set it down. He looked at her. I don't know how to do this, Eleanor. Any of this. I want to be honest about that. I have a procedure for everything and no procedure at all for the one thing the breath, the costing one. But I would like to learn it the way you taught me the coffee. Badly, at first. With supervision. Over a number of years, I find I am suddenly very greedy for. She should have told him then. She knew it even as it was happening, knew it the way you know in a dream that the ground is wrong. She had a husband's name still in a registry, and a ring on a chain under her blouse, and a wall with his own money in the mortar. And he had just spoken the future tense, out loud for the first time in his guarded life, and the only right thing, the only clean thing, was to set it down the whole weight, before he built one more hour on a foundation she'd hidden from him. Instead, she let him kiss her hand, the soil-stained back of it, like something out of his grandmother's century. And she let the snow fall, and she let herself have the morning. One morning. The glimpse of the thing as if it were already won. She would pay for it. She knew she would pay for it. She paid for it anyway, gladly the way the tree had bloomed in December, and 44 floors below them, in a newsroom that did not sleep. A careful, patient woman named Renata Sol was already setting the type that would take it all apart by Monday, fed at last the loose thread she'd hunted for months by the one man with the research to find it and the grudge to spend it. Gregory Mott, escorted out on Friday with nothing left to protect, who had kept Eleanor's bank and her father's gate in a file, and now traded the marriage certificate 2 years old, the name on it, all of it, to the journalist sniffing the Vale name. A last cut from a man who never raised his voice, even on the way down. The thing she had dreaded, and the thing she had longed for, arrived in the same hour, wearing the same face, and that was almost the cruelest part. It broke on Monday, as Renata Sol had quietly always intended, while the snow was still on the city. Eleanor's phone went first. Marjorie, no dryness in her voice at all, which was how Eleanor knew before the words came. It's everywhere. Your mother's loose thread, Mr. Vale's brother, and a wife. There is a wife in the story, child. There's a marriage certificate, 2 years old, with a name on it that I have just this minute watched go grey on Adrian's face. A breath, and then, lower, almost gentle, which was worse. He's downstairs. He came down to the lobby himself, which he never does. You'd best come. Whatever this is, you don't want him hearing the shape of it from anyone but you. By the time Eleanor reached the lobby, Julian Vale was standing in it. In the flesh, beside his brother, the resemblance was a kind of vertigo. 2 men built from one blueprint, one of them weathered into here, and one of them still leaving, even while standing still. And Eleanor stopped on the marble and watched her husband look at her across the gulf of 2 years, and watched Adrian look between them, and watched the exact moment Adrian Vale understood. It moved across his face like cold across glass. There was no shout in it. Adrian's understanding never shouted. That was the unbearable thing about it. You know her, Adrian said to his brother flat. Final. Here's the thing. Julian started, and could not finish it. Because for once there was no charming way through, and the half-second late smile arrived, and found nothing to do, and faded off his mouth like breath off a window. You're married to her. Adrian's voice did not rise. That was the terrible part. It went quiet and exact, the voice he used to align a door. The story is true. There's a wife. She's been. He turned to Eleanor, and the here eyes she had loved for being here were here now, and she wished to God they were anywhere else. How long have you known that I was his brother? The first day, the elevator. You held your breath in the elevator. I thought it was nerves. I built a whole theory of you on it being nerves. Adrian, did you come to me knowing? It wasn't a question anymore. It had stopped being a question and become a verdict looking for its evidence. Did you take this job knowing whose office it was? The conservatory, the lemon tree, the board meeting today. You found a thief in my house in your first month, Eleanor. You read records a man hid for 20 years like they were a child's primer. Was any of it? He stopped himself. He exhaled, slow, the breath he took before saying the thing that cost. My mother said, "Everyone who is kind to me is doing arithmetic. I have spent my entire life proving her right by leaving the room before anyone could prove it for me, and here you are. My brother's wife, with a gift for finding what rich men hide. In my house, tending my grandmother's tree. It wasn't like that. But she heard it the way he heard it. She heard exactly how it sounded. The marriage hidden, the face recognized and concealed, the money she'd discovered, ran from his account to her father's gate. The ledger that, no matter how she read it, showed Eleanor Hartley owing the Vale fortune, and standing in the middle of it, fluent in finding the seam. There was no sentence she could say that did not sound like the confession of the exact woman his whole life had taught him to expect, and the worst of it, the part that closed her throat, was that some of it was true. She had hidden. She had known the face. She had not told him. "I never used what I felt," she said, "which was true and useless. Whatever you think I came here to take, I never let myself reach for the one thing I actually wanted, because it was forbidden, because I was married to your brother, and I had no right. And I held that line every single day, Adrian, in that glass house, an arm's length from you That," said Adrian Vale, very quietly, "is the only thing you've said that I believe, and it's the worst of all of them. Because it means it was real. You let it be real. And you still didn't tell me." He stepped back. He aligned himself, unconsciously, to the cold lobby light, squaring his shoulders to a grid only he could see, retreating into procedure, because procedure was the only place that had never once betrayed him. "Go home, Eleanor. Wherever that is. You're married. Apparently, you have been the whole time. I do hope it was at least a clean column for you. I'd hate to think you got the arithmetic wrong after all this." He walked away across the marble, the responsible twin, the one who stayed in the room, leaving the room at last, and Eleanor stood between the man whose name she carried and the absence of the man she loved. And Julian, beside her, said softly, "He's never spoken to anyone like that in his life. Do you understand? He doesn't bother. You have to matter to be worth the cruelty." And it was the kindest thing Julian Vale had ever said to her, and the most useless, and 44 floors up the lemon tree held its fruit in the dark for no one at all. She went back to Coldbrook and let the snow close over the city behind her. And for 3 days she did not fix a single thing. She let the orchids be someone else's problem. She let the silence be. She sat in the dark glass house with the bank's notice frozen to the gate and her father's tools rusting on the wall. And she let herself feel the whole shape of it, the way you finally probe a tooth that's been aching for years. That she had built her entire pride on owing no powerful man anything, and the foundation of her father's rescue, the very stone of her self-respect, had been Adrian Vale's money the entire time, moved by Julian's careless hand. She had been bound to Adrian before she ever met him. The wall she'd hidden behind had his name in the mortar. There was no version of the ledger where she came out clean. And Eleanor, who had spent her life trusting that a clean ledger was the same as a clean heart, sat in the cold and understood at last that they had never been the same thing, that she had used one to avoid the other, that a person can balance every account she owns, and still owe everyone she loves the one currency she's too frightened to spend. The cold got into the glass house and into her chest, and she let it. She thought she might let it stay. Posy found her on the 3rd night, came in with 2 mugs of cocoa and her father's old wool blanket, and sat down in the freezing dark beside her sister without a word, because Posy had learned, somewhere, the thing Adrian Vale had learned, that you do not fix the people you love, you sit with them, and the sitting is the fixing. And after a while she said, You can't read your way out of this one, Nell. I know that's your move. Stare at the numbers till they confess. But people aren't a column. He's not Mott. You don't expose him. You. Posey struggled for it. You tell him the true thing, even though it costs you everything, and you get nothing back, and you have no leverage and no proof, and it might change. Nothing at all. That's the only currency he's never been paid in. You said it yourself. You said he's never once been loved for anything but what he fixes, so don't fix anything for him. Just come to him empty-handed. Owing. For once in your life, owe somebody on purpose. He told me to go home. He told you you were married, Posey said. So stop being married. There's a courthouse 2 streets from where you signed it. She took her sister's frozen hands and held them between her own. Julian made you a wife to save you. Be brave enough to unmake it to choose. That's not the same as the marriage, Nell. The marriage was a rescue. Somebody did it to you, you were the thing being saved. This would be a decision, the first one in 4 years where you're the one doing the saving. And the thing you're saving isn't the glass house, or Dad's name or me. It's you. It's the part of you that's allowed to want something, just because you want it. Eleanor looked at the dark gate, with her family's name, behind the banks, the H, her father had painted, the looping pride of it. She thought about the difference between the one you love and the one you rely upon. She had spent her whole life refusing to be relied upon by anyone, so that no one could ever delegate her away. And in doing it, she had refused, just as completely, to be loved, had hidden her own ring against her own heart and called the hiding integrity. It's not the marriage I have to undo, she said slowly, and her breath fogged in the cold and hung there. It's the wall. She caught the first train back at dawn. But she did not go to Vale Tower. She went to find her husband, because before she could choose Adrian, she had to set down everything she'd been carrying for the both of them. And there was a debt there, older than the one in any ledger, and it was hers, finally to call in. Julian Vale was, of course, at a hotel bar at 11 in the morning, because Julian Vale was always exactly where you'd be saddest to find him. He looked up when she sat down, and the smile arrived its half-second late, and for the first time in 2 years she saw what was under it. A boy who had been loved so easily and trusted with so little that he'd decided to make it true, to be a person you forgave and never relied upon, because being relied upon meant being seen, and being seen meant being found out as not enough. He and Adrian had been handed the same wound and walked opposite directions with it. One had become indispensable. One had become charming. Neither had been loved for himself a single day in his life, and they had spent 31 years a mirror apart, each certain the other had gotten the easier deal. He won't take my calls, Julian said. First time ever. 31 years, and I have finally found the one thing my brother won't fix. He turned a cocktail ring on his finger, around and around, the old tell. Here's the thing, Nellie. Stop, she said gently. No more here's the thing. You've hidden behind that phrase your whole life. It's how you tell me something true is coming, and then swerve before you reach it. Just tell me one true thing without the run-up, and then I'm going to ask you to do one hard thing, and then we're done, you and I, for good. Kindly, but for good. He went quiet. He set the ring down on the bar, flat, deliberately, the way you set down a thing you've decided to stop spinning. The money you gave my father, she said. It was Adrian's, wasn't it? A long breath. He looked at the bottles behind the bar rather than at her. I told him it was for a deal. He never checks. He just covers me. He's covered me my whole life, Nell. Every scrape, every collapse. Since we were 9, and I broke the thing, and he said he did it, so I wouldn't be the one Mother stopped loving. I needed a wife for the trust clause. Grandmother's trust, it unlocked at 30, if I was married. She thought it'd make a man of me. She was wrong. She was usually wrong about me in the most loving possible way. And you needed a glass house. And his money was just there, the way it's always there, like weather. I never even thought of it as his. That's the whole disease of me in one sentence, isn't it? I never thought of it as his. The charm was entirely gone now, and what was left was almost dignified. I didn't know you'd matter, Nell. I married a stranger to unlock a trust, and I picked the one woman in the world who'd end up being the thing my brother. He stopped. He loves you. I've watched him my whole life decline to feel things on a schedule. He declined 3 calls from Mother this month, and stayed up on a roof with you, and a half-gun tree. I notice things. It's my one skill. I notice everything, and do nothing about it. That's the difference between us, in the end. He fixes what he notices. I just admire it on the way out. Do one now, Eleanor said. The hard thing, the doing. Sign the annulment. It was never a real marriage, and you know it. 2 days, and a courthouse, and a brother's money, and a cheek instead of a mouth. It'll go through clean in a week. And then go to Renata Sol, and to your mother, and to the board if you have to, and tell the true story with your own name in it. That Julian Vale married a woman to use his brother's money to unlock his own trust, and then ran, and that she never knew the money was Adrian's, and that none of it, not the marriage, not the money, not the silence, was ever hers to answer for. Clear my name by spending your own. She held his gaze and did not look away, because she had learned that from his brother. It'll cost you the thing you've protected longest. The story that you're harmless. That you're just the charming one, the one nobody could expect anything from. You'll have to be the one who did something, finally, on purpose, in the open, where it's on the record forever. I know that's the most expensive thing in the world to you. I'm asking anyway. Julian Vale looked at the woman his brother loved, and at the ring on the bar, and somewhere in him a clock that had been running down for 31 years, finally reached the bottom, and stopped its spinning. Here's the... He almost smiled, and this time the smile arrived on time. Yes, he said. All right, yes. For once in my life, before I've thought of 3 ways out of it, yes. He did it. That was the thing none of them expected, least of all Julian. He did all of it. The annulment went through clean, the way nothing in his life had ever gone, because for the first time he wanted it to. He sat with Renata Sol for 2 hours and gave her a better story than the one she'd had. The true one, with his own name carrying the weight of it, and the feature that ran was not Vale Hire's secret wife, but something quieter and harder, a portrait of a charming man finally agreeing to be the disappointing one out loud, so that a woman he'd used would not have to be. He went to his mother and told her, to her face, in her own drawing room, that the loose thread had always been him, that she had spent 40 years protecting the wrong son from the consequences, and leaning on the other one, until he was nothing but consequence. Management in a good suit, that she had loved one of them recklessly and the other one usefully, and that neither of them had survived it whole. Vivienne Vale did not soften all at once. People like Vivienne never do. The softening is geological. You measure it in seasons. But she came to Adrian's office a week later and stood in the door in her furs and said, stiffly, looking at the carpet, the closest she had in her to an apology, I appear to have done my arithmetic badly. For a very long time, with both of you, and it was not nothing it was, Eleanor would have said, almost everything, which with the Vales was the most anyone ever got, and more than most of them deserved, and somehow, because they were trying, enough. But that was all later. First, there was the conservatory. Eleanor went up at dawn with the annulment in her bag, and the ring no longer on its chain. She had left it on the table in the Coldbrook courthouse, where it belonged, with the marriage it had stood for, and walked out into the snow lighter by the weight of a small gold thing and a very large, old fear. And she found Adrian Vale among the failing things he had failed to keep, except they were not failing anymore. She had seen to that before everything broke. The orchids held, the fig had reconsidered, and on the lemon tree, where 2 hard green knots had clung all winter, One had ripened gold, heavy and absurd on its thin branch, perfuming the cold air with the smell of somewhere warmer than anywhere either of them had ever let themselves stand. "I'm not married," she said to his back. "As of Tuesday. It was never real. 2 days, a courthouse, your money, my father's gate, a kiss on the cheek from a man who was already at the airport in his head. I didn't know it was your money. I want to be very precise about the order of things, because precision is the only gift I have that you've ever valued, so I'm going to give it to you straight, and you can do the arithmetic, and whatever it comes to, it comes to." She drew a breath. It shook. She let it shake. "I knew your face the first day. In the elevator, I held my breath because I thought I was looking at the man who'd left me, and instead I was looking at the man who stayed in the room, and I didn't have a word for that yet, so I just held my breath, and then every morning after, I held it a little longer. I should have told you. I hid it because being known has only ever meant being priced in my life. My father trusted a powerful man who looked at what he had and opened a ledger and took it all, took his glass house and his name, and the straight way he used to stand. And you were the first person who ever looked at what I could do and didn't reach for a pen, so I hid behind a wall to keep the one thing I'd never been given, and that was a coward's way to love someone. I'm sorry, not for feeling it. I'll never be sorry for that, for hiding it." Adrian Vale turned around. He did not align himself to the light. He did not take the breath he took before saying the thing that cost. He had, she saw, already paid, had gone to the board the day before and broken the unbreakable rule, the no scandal rule, the position. Not Secret's rule his mother had carved into him. Had stood in front of the 14 suits and the lawyers and one careful journalist and claimed the whole messy truth of his family out loud, his brother's marriage, his own funded rescues, all of it, no fixing, no envelope, no quiet, had surrendered the one thing he'd built his life upon, the cleanness, the control, the unbreakable surface, and let himself be seen standing in the wreck of it on the record forever. Marjorie had told her, that morning, on the phone, and Marjorie had been crying, which Marjorie would deny to the grave and beyond it. "I don't want to fix you," Adrian said. "I've spent my whole life arranging people at a safe distance, so I'd never have to risk loving one and being relied upon instead of wanted. You, I can't arrange. You won't hold still in the system. You ruin every procedure I have." His mouth did the thing it had only ever managed once before, up here, over a joke about orchids. "The orchids have feelings. I can't fire them, and I find I can't fire you either, which is awkward because you no longer work for me. I had papers drawn up, not a severance, a partnership, Hartley and Daughters Glass House. Your father's name back on the gate, the bank's notice gone, your hands on every decision, my capital and not one single inch of my control. You'd own a thing that owns a piece of me. I've never let anyone own a piece of me. I find the breath, finally the one that costs. I find I want to owe you something, Eleanor, after a lifetime of arranging it so that no one ever could. I want the ledger open, permanently, unbalanced, with you, only ever with you." She crossed the conservatory. The river light came sideways through the clean glass and laid itself across both their faces, the same face she'd seen on a stranger, in an elevator, and learned slowly, in the warm, rotten rain dark of a glass house full of things everyone else had given up on, was not the same face at all. Was the one that stayed, the one that asked the real question, the one that had finally, terribly, let itself be found. "That's not nothing," Eleanor said, and her voice broke on it at last, gladly, completely. "No," Adrian said, and reached for her hands, soul-stained, fixing things hands here, entirely, at last, and held them as though they were the one thing in his ordered life he had no procedure for and wanted none. Apparently it's almost everything. He kissed her under the lemon tree in December, where nothing should have bloomed, and the one gold fruit hung over them, like a promise that someone, this time against every reasonable expectation, had finally decided to keep. The Hartley and Daughters glass house reopened in the spring, and the bank's notice came off the gate, and the new sign went up in her father's hand because Posey had copied it letter for letter from his old ledgers. The looping H he'd always been so proud of, the one he used to say a name should stand up straight like a good tomato cane. It is a strange thing to watch the very rich learn to be ordinary. Adrian Vale, who had never in his life done a single thing without a system, learned to repot seedlings badly, and water on instinct, and stand in a glass house in the rain, because his wife was in it, and the rain was where she wanted to be. He still aligned the seed trays to the grain of the bench. Some things are not wounds. Some things are just a person, and Eleanor had no wish to fix him down to nothing. But he asked real questions now, all the time, dozens of them, greedily, as if making up for 30 years of already knowing the answer before he'd let himself need one. What is this one called? Why won't it bloom? What does it need? How do you tell when a thing is loyal and when it's only stubborn? And Eleanor answered all of them, everyone, and some of them were even about the plants. Julian sent a postcard from somewhere new every few months, and he was still leaving, would probably always be leaving. Some shapes a person doesn't outgrow, only befriend. But he wrote his own name at the bottom now, in full, instead of a charming half-finished line, and he had paid back the advance, every cent of it, the first debt of his life he had ever cleared, in 12 plain installments with no flourish. Once a year he came to the glass house, and stayed exactly one awkward healing day, and stood in the green warmth between his brother and the woman he'd accidentally given him. And it was not nothing. Vivienne came at Christmas, and did not feed anyone, and criticized the heating, and stayed 3 days longer than she'd booked, and stood in the warm green house her son had married into, doing her slow geological arithmetic, at last, in a different direction. Marjorie retired to a cottage 2 towns over, and grew tomatoes the size of her own considerable opinions, and pretended, to anyone who asked, that she had never in her life cried about anything, least of all a half-gun lemon tree and 2 lonely people who'd finally learned to share a key. And on the rooftop of Vale Tower, 44 floors above the cold, bright city, the Meyer lemon tree that everyone had given up for finished went on stubbornly, impossibly fruiting, gold knot after gold knot, season out of all reasonable season, because it had simply, at the worst possible time and against every schedule, decided to live, and every morning a woman who had once sworn she'd owe no living soul anything went up in the early light to tend it beside the man, whose face she had known before she ever knew his heart. The boss who had turned out to be her husband's brother, the stranger in the elevator, the one who stayed. "You're late," he'd say, every morning, not looking up, because it had become the safest way he had to say the other thing. "I'm 11 minutes early," she'd say. "I'll always be 11 minutes early. You can set every clock you own by me." And he would look up then, every single time, because he had learned at last to want the one thing he could never arrange, and the river light would come sideways through the clean glass, and lay itself across both their faces, and the day would begin the way the best impossible things always do. Not because they should, and not because the ledger said they could, but because 2 stubborn, frightened, finally brave people had looked at the whole improbable price of it and decided, together, gladly, out loud, that they would.